News at the bottom of the hour. On the other side, something we don't maybe talk about often enough, and that is young people and money. And I know most young people don't have much, but if they're going to acquire some money so that years down the road, they're not worried about how they're going to pay the rent or keep their houses when they get to senior age, they need to learn about money at a young age. We're going to talk about how we teach young people about money next.
Geoff Currier on 680 CJOB.
We're going to talk about money for the next little bit. Not necessarily yours, but depending on how old you are, I guess. But we are going to talk about money and the importance of learning about money at a young age. Now, there was a time when this was really the job of parents to teach their kids about how to handle money. And many of you got an allowance when you were a kid and you had to learn how to manage that money. And that was your first experience in budgeting and making decisions for yourself. And the advice that we always get is starting with your first paycheck, put 10% aside. When they say pay yourself first, that's what they talk about. The problem is that not nearly enough of us actually do that. And consequently, we've got a fairly wide swath of our seniors population these days who are in a financial crunch. Some of them because they didn't put that 10% away. Some through a variety of other circumstances. But I want to talk about money and young people here. Gary Rabbior is president of the Canadian Foundation for Economic Education, and he's in Winnipeg today to meet with our education minister and so forth. Gary, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
It's some years since you and I have actually spoken. Mm-hmm. So why do we need to go through our education system when it comes to financial literacy? And when, as I said, at one time, that was considered to be the job of parents.
Well, it's interesting, and I would say it's probably not the exclusive job of schools, but just as a point of interest, we did a survey back in November, and we asked over 6,000 young people 5 basic questions. Do you want to learn about money? If so, what do you want to learn? And if so, where and from whom? And we gave them an open-ended section at the end. They screamed that they want to learn about this. So obviously for whoever might hold the responsibility, they're not getting as much as they would like. They told us clearly all the sorts of things they wanted to learn about. And then interestingly, when we gave them the option of apps, internet, games, whatever, where and how they wanted to learn, by far the first choice was home and second was school. Obviously, there's a feeling of trust in this area and they want it from trusted sources. And as much as what parents may be perceived to have the responsibility in the past, the world of money has changed over time. It was interesting. I was in St. John's yesterday and talking with the deputy minister there, and he asked me, okay, you've been doing this since the late 70s. How have things changed about financial education from then until now? And it was an interesting thing to consider because back then it was very practical. There wasn't a lot you needed to know. You had a savings account, a checking account, pretty practical stuff.
Yeah, life insurance, all that, that kind of stuff, right? All the basics.
But now it's become essential. It affects people's lives. Alberta, for example, is putting financial literacy under their health and well-being curriculum. They're seeing physical health, mental health, financial health, all intertwined to affect people's lives in terms of happiness, stress, and whatever. And so increasingly money has become not so much, and you made a point at the outset there, it's not so much knowledge as it is knowing as it is doing. And what's been found over time is that knowledge doesn't necessarily translate into behavior. And what we're really wanting to do is have kids act in a way that's in their own best interest. So we're not as interested in talking about pros and cons of credit cards and things like that. We're looking for them to act. So, for example, whenever they make a decision, think of the trade-off that decision is entailing. What are you giving up today or in the future as you make it? That's not a specific. It's a tactic, if you like. And the other thing that we very much emphasize, and it's often surprising for people who hear us talk about financial education, is how important at a young age the self-efficacy of a child is. That is their belief that they can set a goal and achieve it. And if I could share anything with parents and teachers, at a young age, let your kids set a goal however much in their comfort zone. Achieve it and let them feel what it's like to set that goal and achieve it. Because if they do, later on, they will plan for their money decisions because they'll have the confidence and belief that they can do so. But without it, we get people who are willy-nilly affected by other people setting limits for them on terms of their debt levels, on their credit cards, when really they should know best and know what's comfortable for them.
All right, so you're talking about, if you start saving your money to buy a bike or whatever it is, whatever the end goal happens to be, to teach somebody that if you take this action at the end of the line. One of the challenges we have, of course, Gary, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know or any parent doesn't know, to tell a 10 or 12 or 15 or 16-year-old what their life is going to be like in 30 years is meaningless to them, right? Because they can't possibly project that far in advance.
Yeah.
So this is one of the challenges. So do we need to compress those goals instead of saying, look, if you start saving now, you're going to have a great retirement? Well, they can't imagine ever being that old. Like when you're 15, you just being 65 just doesn't happen. Right. And so, do we need to compress those goals and say, look, if you save for a month, or if you do this for the next month, here's what you're going to have at the end. Do we need to compress those?
Well, actually, the kind of goals I'm talking about don't necessarily even need to be financial ones. Rather than buying a bike, it could be riding a bike. The kids. It's funny. I stood in front of a group of high school kids here in Winnipeg some years ago and asked them, "Tell me what you've accomplished in life." And I stood there for 45 seconds in silence, which, as you can imagine, was unbelievably awkward for the kids. And then they looked around because they were thinking, I haven't got a job yet. I haven't graduated school yet. All these long-term goals. And then finally one young man said, I learned to ride a bike. And as soon as I validated that as a goal, they popped up all over the place. But they weren't recognizing those as things they'd done in their lives. And
they know how to do more than they think they do.
They do. And boy, once you get them into, we'll be showcasing students from a money fair, actually at the legislature here on April 19th. And what money fairs is like a science fair. They pick a money topic, do research, and create a display summarizing what they've learned, and then they engage people in discussion about it. Young people blow people away with what they're able to learn and be able to converse about in terms of financial matters.
Well, they'll reach the bar we set for them, won't they?
They will. They'll work down to or up to. And in many cases, when you open the door for them, they unbelievably excel. To watch a group of teachers and parents standing around two young men talking about 8 ways in which people steal your identity, and things like that, which are the topics. They're allowed to pick topics that are of interest to them. So they get that passion assigned to it. And we had 2 grade 4 boys win a money fair competition talking about the 6 key principles of economics. And these 2 grade 4 boys could talk a blue streak around most people. And they even had little props where they simulated trade to show how trade was a win-win situation. Young people want to learn about this. They have the capacity to learn about this. And it will do them such a lifelong benefit if they do.
There's part of the old Anglo-Saxon mentality that talking about money, how much you make, how much you spend, was almost vulgar. It just wasn't done. You don't talk about money. And that sort of translated for a lot of parents to their kids. They wouldn't even talk to their kids about money. Is that still a problem?
Well, it becomes a question of how you go about it. We have this program, Talk With Our Kids About Money, and we have our website, talkwithoursKidsAboutMoney.com. And on there's a home program and a school program, and there's activities and resources for parents of kids from 5 to 18. And it isn't sit your kid down and say, we're going to learn this now. It's to provide natural opportunities of a movie you could watch, a TV show you could watch, a book you could read, a place you could go, something that would stimulate the creativity or provide the opportunity for you to have that discussion. But it wouldn't be such that you're there. The relationship between a teacher and a student is different than a parent and a child. And we try to make it a very comfortable, fun, and engaging one to look at opportunities for talking about, not revealing how much you make. And it's interesting that many parents say, what am I going to do? I've made so many mistakes in my life. And we try and tell them that makes you the best teacher because you don't have to tell your child you made those mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes and you can help your child avoid those mistakes. So I think the barriers are coming down, and increasingly around the world, some of the research is showing that the first step in effective financial education is to get people talking.
One of the difficulties I'm sure you've encountered is that that young people are now being raised by a generation of Canadians whose debt-to-income ratio is so far out of whack that they have proven themselves to be financially irresponsible. So how do these financially irresponsible people with mortgages that they have no hope of ever paying off, credit card debt that they will never get out of, what gives these people the intellectual or moral authority to teach their kids anything about money.
I think you go that old saying, been there, done that. They have been in situations where they, for example, may have been offered lines of credit or credit limits and whatever that exceeded even what they were comfortable with, but they accepted them because they were allowed to take them. And as such, they entered into these very stress-filled lives. And I think one of the most important things we can share with our kids is make your own decisions. Stay in control of your life. Set your limits, because invariably you're going to go out there knowing what you're comfortable doing. And you may get the opportunity presented to you to do more than that. But it's not going to be what you're comfortable with. And we have so many people right now who in a very changing and dynamic world got themselves overextended for various and sundry reasons. I don't think anybody wants financial stress. In some cases, they're simply coping with the demands on life and how things have evolved and how many influences have been brought to bear on them to make decisions that maybe put them in those stressful situations. And we can help our kids not be in those situations.
Or as we always say, buying things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like.
That's right. That's right.
We're going to come back and talk more to Gary Rabbior is president of the Canadian Foundation for Economic Education. We'll be back.
The best things in life are free, but you can keep them for the best, and please now give me more. What I want, that's what I want. That's what I
Sometimes the cover version is better than the original. And that was one of them. Beatles version is better than the original. Gary Rabbior is here talking about money and young people. And he's the president of the Canadian Foundation for Economic Education. And you're going to be meeting with our education minister, Ian Wishart's people today, and chatting with him about it. And how do we incorporate this? One of the things you mentioned earlier in our first segment, Gary, I wanted to come back and touch on is how our economic health ties into our mental and physical health. Now, clearly, if you don't have enough money to feed yourself properly, we know that poverty, for example, is a direct connection to people's poor health. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one. If you haven't got the wherewithal to buy nutritious food, you're going to suffer. But money can also really play on our state of mental health, especially if that, as we talked in the last segment, if that debt starts to pile up, that can really have an impact on you. So how do you impart that to a young person who probably has no financial worries at all? If you're still a kid living at home, I mean, you haven't got any financial worries. I mean, your big concern is, am I going to have enough money to go to the movies or that kind of thing? That's your big financial worry. How do you convince them that that irresponsible spending is going to have that kind of a negative impact? And we get back to that point that kids they're kind of concrete thinkers, right? They don't project 5, 10, 20, 30 years into the future.
Well, I think in many respects, young people, and it comes back to parents teaching their kids about money, they're teaching their kids whether they know it or not, because kids are watching, they're listening, they're observing. And a lot of times the stress in households is very observable to kids. So as much as you might wonder, how do we convey that to kids? A lot of kids recognize it and they see it. The other thing about it, and one of the things that I think is a significant issue across this country, is that young people, when we don't talk to them about money, have false expectations regarding what the world is out there. The BC Securities Commission did a survey of young people, and when they revealed what they thought their incomes were going to be, when they thought they would own a home and things like that, were so far out of whack with reality. And what happens then is if you allow that to persist, a young person graduates thinking, I did everything I should. They come out and their income's much lower than they thought it was going to be.
It's not 120, it's 35.
You got it. And they feel despondent about it. There's a college in Canada that did a survey of their youth recently, and they found that 60% of them showed signs of depression. And a lot of it comes from their prospects of their future and their hopes for their future. How are they going to do this? What are they going to earn? Things like that. So it manifests itself in the stress that young people feel in so many ways. And I think one of the ways we can deal with it, one is talk about it, because that is a way that you can heal some of that. And the second one is to help them realize what the world is really like and what real expectations should be, so they can go out and exceed those, not come out and feel diminished because they're not realizing the unrealistic ones.
Yeah. So have that conversation with your kids. How much do you think you're probably going to start earning when you get your first job? Or as I say, if they say it's 120,000, probably closer to that 35 range or 30, right? It's and depending on the occupation, of course. But but to make sure that their expectations are realistic, that they have some understanding. Hey, you're living in a nice house now, kid, but I've just spent the last 35 or 40 years getting to this point.
And you don't even have to talk to them about you, your job, your income. Take something. One of the things that's important to understand is that the chances of success in any field of occupation or entrepreneurship extends most from what you feel passionate about. And if you can find the passion of a child, either as a student or as a teacher or as a parent, and work with that passion to help it direct, you could see what your kid is interested in. What possible jobs are there in that field? And look at the incomes that those jobs pay. So they start to realize the compensation levels of different careers, and also perhaps maybe find out that going into the skilled trades may in fact generate an income beyond their wildest imaginations, given the way that those things are going right now, and create more viable career paths and options for your child so that they aren't singularly focused perhaps on university, if that maybe isn't the best route for the passion of your child.
Gary, I sometimes think, and because you're connected to education, and it's not just financial literacy, I sometimes think that if we have somebody who shows a real passion and a real flair for something, if somebody's got a flair for economics or for money management, we try to improve their language skills or their geography skills or something like, you're really good here, but you need to get better in these other things. I sometimes think we get that backwards. That if somebody shows a real passion and a flair and a gift for a certain area, we should encourage that person to do all they can to foster that, rather than, I don't want to say wasting time, but spending an inordinate amount of time trying to improve their weaknesses. I mean, baseball pitchers will tell you that. Yeah. You practice. You don't. You work on your strengths. Go to your strengths. Don't try to do something that you're not great at, but be great at something.
Well, and I think, one of the things we always talk about, the fact is that if you don't have an engaged learner, you probably don't have a learner. And really striking at the passion and what a young person really cares about can be a great opportunity for education in whatever direction you might want to take it. We're working with the province of PEI right now to integrate, for example, enterprise education into grades 4 to 10, meaning not to start a business, but what are all the skills, attributes, and attitudes associated with enterprising behavior to be the person who identifies the opportunity, creates an idea, mobilizes things to make things happen, which allows them to look at themselves and what they're interested in, and where could I make a difference? And that starts to tap into the passion you're talking about.
Now, we love the word innovation these days, but as I've said very often on this show, that innovation these days is a word in search of a definition. Mm-hmm. But that's what you're talking about, is making sure that we turn people into the workforce who are going to be the innovators, the creative people, the imaginative, the forward-thinking people in their organizations.
And a lot of what's happening in education across the country, including here in Manitoba, is, I think, an appreciation that we perhaps have to back off on how much we teach in the volume of outcomes we include in our curriculum, and allow more times for the dynamic in-class student participation and learning. Because if you're overwhelmed with outcomes, you're overwhelmed as a teacher and you're doing a ton of teaching. Whereas if we back off on that, we can allow the student to be much more participant and be much more active in the learning. And that is much more retentive than sitting there being a receptor. Being an active participant in learning is much more effective in terms of kids' participation.
What would you like to hear from our provincial reps today when you meet them? What do you want to go away with?
I got to tell you, we couldn't hear much better than what we've had lately. We have this program, Talk with Our Kids About Money Day, coming up on April 19th, and a shout out to Scotiabank, our partner on that. Manitoba is the first province to step up and provincially partner with us on that program. We had 5,000 schools across the country participate last year, and including thousands of parents. But Manitoba was the first and said, we'd like to collaborate with you as a province, not to force it and make it compulsory, but to help share information with our teachers and our schools and whatever. And to their credit, they stepped up, as they have frequently, to be one of the first in this area. Our Money and Youth publication, which has been so popular, the province of Manitoba a couple of years ago gave a copy to every grade 10 kid in the province. I mean, there is a real desire within the group here, more so than many across the country, who are all doing something. But I have to give a shout out and applaud to what the people in the Department of Education are doing here in this area.
Gary, thanks very much. Great to see you again. Enjoy your time here, and you'll be back, I know, on the 19th. All right. Gary Rabbior is president of the Canadian Foundation for Economic Education. News.